Hello, everyone, and welcome to People, Nature, Big Ideas. I am your host, Rhonda Lee Chapman, and I am joined today by a number of very special guests at a very special time in a very special place. I can't believe that I have the privilege of saying that we are recording this episode in the WERD, the Word Studios. It's the first Black-owned radio station in the United States here in downtown Atlanta, Georgia. One of the things that makes this place so special, among many reasons, is Prince Hall Masonic Lodge is where Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. and other Black leaders catalyzed this early civil rights movement. The lodge was also home to the Southern Christian Leadership Council, as well as the headquarters of Madam C.J. Walker, along with other influential organizations and leaders. And this lodge, I think, and we'll hear from you today, has been a living monument to Black enterprise, to Black leadership, to organizing, to faith, to music, to culture. And honestly, it does feel, again, like a privilege to be sitting here in this space. This is actually where the studio existed. So I'm really overwhelmed and grateful to all of you for being here to share your story, the story of this place, the story of community. Tomorrow, I know that we're going to be hosting a ribbon cutting. It's going to be here. It's the reopening of this marvelous space. And so it's also going to commemorate its inclusion, if I'm not mistaken, into the National Historic Parks, which feels pretty monumental. So we're going to celebrate the space, the history. We're going to celebrate all of you here. It's a momentous event, and we're going to talk about the richness of all of it. We're going to talk about the lodge. We're going to talk about the importance of preserving and protecting this kind of historic space, and also the importance of continuing our education with place. And so my special guests, first off, I'd like to welcome Mr. Ed Bowen. Ed is a Sweet Auburn resident. You're the strategic advisor to this restoration project, as well as the legal advisor to the Prince Hall Masons, and you are a Mason yourself. Welcome.
I am.
Really glad to have you here. I also have Miss Shanae Joseph. Shanae is the president and CEO of the Historic District Development Corporation. You have been driving the revitalization of Sweet Auburn District for a while now, and I welcome you. Right before we started recording this conversation, Jocelyn had asked you to tell us a story across the street. And let me tell you, you are a teacher preacher. You had so much to share, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And then I've got Mr. Reggie Chappell. Reggie is from the National Park Service. He is the superintendent of the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park. Reggie, you've got quite a history as well. I feel like we were kind of commenting, this is full circle. Welcome, Reggie.
Indeed, thank you.
Really, really glad to have you. And last but not least, we have Dr. Jocelyn Imani. Jocelyn is a historian. She is TPL's Senior Director for Black History and Culture. She is a resident of the South. Atlanta is one of her 3 homes. It's very wonderful to have you here, Jocelyn.
Glad to be here.
Welcome, welcome. So here we are, sitting in this space. Again, the first Black-owned radio station in the United States. Word Studios, Word Up, right? And in this Prince Hall Masonic Lodge, I want us to go back to the Wayback Time Machine. And I want to kick this conversation off with you, Ed, and you, Reggie. Talk to us about this place. Tell us why this lodge has represented Black civic leadership, mutual aid, community organizing, all of this over almost the last century.
Well, you know, it's quite a story that sometimes it's not told because people know the Masons as a fraternal group organization, and they always think about secrets. And we're not we don't have secrets. but the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Georgia started in Savannah after the Civil War. And you think back from a historical perspective, a lot of these former slaves were following Sherman as he marched down from Atlanta to Savannah, they were following behind him because that's where they felt there was safety. And so the first head of the Masonic Lodge was Reverend Sims. And most of the members at that time were still are quite active in churches, and most of the head of the lodges were ministers. So the lodge came out of a religious base, and it still has that as its foundation. So the lodge moved from Savannah, Georgia to Atlanta, but it's always been active in education, providing health services, making sure they took care of the needs of the people going back to that period. So the lodge moved from Savannah to Atlanta. It was headed up by Dr. H.R. Butler. He began the process of raising money to build a building so that the Masons could have a place to meet. And it wasn't just the Masons. They wanted a place for Atlanta organizations to meet and talk and try to strategize on things they needed to do to vote, to provide services that were so needed in the community. So when this building was constructed in the late 30s, we were in the Great Depression and moving into World War II. So you had a group of African-American men in the Deep South raising money to construct an office building. And it was not just the Masonic Lodge that met here. Madam C.J. Walker had a school, a beauty school here. North Carolina Mutual had its insurance agency on the first floor. So what I always take pride in is that these men built an office building. And that's just to take that pride and coming up with nickels and dimes and dollars to construct this building is something that I take great pride in. But it was a place that allowed the sleeping car porters to meet and talk and try to strategize on how they should unionize. So it's always been the Masons' interest to be involved in the community, how to help people register to vote, how to help them with healthcare needs, how to help them with burial insurance because people didn't have insurance to bury their loved ones. So it's always been an activist organization, although we do it quietly. But there are a number of members, probably in your family and others, who are members of the lodge. My great-grandfather, as an example, was a member of this lodge. Maynard Jackson, Andrew Young, Thurgood Marshall was general counsel for the Lodge of Georgia. In fact, when they went around the South to register people to vote, it was the Masons who gave them security because they can go in each one of these communities and find a Mason who was a leader in that community, could provide a place for them to eat, somewhere to stay, give them information about who was coming after them. And so I think when Dr. King moved in this building, he looked at that safe haven, that this was a place I can come because people didn't necessarily agree with Dr. King, and people forget that. A lot of these black ministers, Reggie, that Dr. King was too young and was a rebel rouser. But he came and absolutely. But that's a little bit about us. I don't want to take up too much time. But
I love it.
And so I'm proud to have taken the time to raise the money to follow behind that group of men who were able to come up with the dollars to construct this building.
It's impressive and it's inspiring, and it is a question of the things that have happened since that time that kind of leave us to the point that you made about we're not seeing many of us raising money to build office buildings anymore. And some of that could be a virtue of how technology has taken over in the way we move and communicate these days. Some of it could be a matter of how safe we might feel. Some of it could be because we have a different set of priorities these days. And so I imagine we're going to get to some of that when we talk about revitalization and neighborhood and the future, et cetera, et cetera. But Reggie, I want to ask you about that human connection and that interaction of Dr. King and others that this building allowed us today to illuminate, to think about the Sweet Auburn neighborhood and Dr. King's presence. We heard about the safe haven that this space provided, but that human interaction, that human connection. Can you say a little bit about that?
Sure, and thanks for having the park represented here today. Following Ed, it's going to be a tough charge, that kind of living history being right here with us. But the human dimension through the prism of Dr. King is what the Martin Luther King National Historical Park and Preservation District actually does. Our enabling legislation is to talk about where Dr. King was born, lived, worked, worshiped, and is buried, and then to work on the preservation district with some of my colleagues around the table. So the human dimension starts in 1929 with Dr. King being born at 501 Auburn Avenue, right? And so he's born in his home. And so if this building is built in 1937, that makes him around 8 years old, and he's able to walk out of his front door, stand on his porch and look left and see this building coming out of the ground on Auburn Avenue. And what kind of pride that must have been for a young man to be able to see his people building up Auburn Avenue and through mutual aid, self-help, through their own dollars, through their own contractors, architects. And so when we try to figure out how did Dr. King become who he is, this is one of those moments that he experienced on Auburn Avenue. The human dimension doesn't stop there. It continues with him coming down to see Grandmaster John Wesley Dobbs at the building as he's growing up. John Wesley Dobbs becomes a mentor to him, and John Wesley Dobbs has children his same age, so he's interacting with those children as well. And so he's using Dobbs as a mentor. So he's dressing up in his suit, overcoat in the summertime to come down to the building to ask for advice, to ask John Wesley Dobbs about speeches that he's making. And what we intend to do with the building is to take some of that John Wesley Dobbs, some of those speeches, and mirror them next to King, and to be able to begin to see how he was influencing Dr. King and Dr. Maurice Hobson at Georgia State University, now chair of Africana Studies, has done some of that work. And so our goal is to humanize Dr. King. I think a lot of times what you see is him doing speeches like the I Have a Dream speech, or him speaking in Memphis the day before he is killed. And so we see a very stern, passionate, emboldened King, but we want the guy who was smiling, who folks were singing happy birthday to in the building, the guy who was walking from his childhood home to Ebenezer Baptist Church, where he was co-pastor, then to this building. And so being able to narrate that story and showing him actually growing over time with the building. And it's no surprise then in 1961, when he's looking for a home for his organization to move the Southern Christian Leadership Conference from the basement of Ebenezer Baptist Church to a new location, he chooses the Masons building because, as Ed is saying, it's a safe haven. It's the place that he has always come to. It's the place that he's watched become important over time. It's the place that his father, Daddy King, has come to help organize when Daddy King is organizing for equity and equality for Black teachers in Atlanta. That kind of stuff happened out of this building as a locus, as a brain for Auburn Avenue. And so that is the human dimension. It's not just a building. It's not just a location. We're interested in the people, place, culture aspect of the building itself, and we can't leave out the other components. We can't leave out WERDs. This is how Dr. King gets his messages out. And when you study community and community development, you know that a community cannot survive without a printing press or a way of getting the word out. And so we have that in this building as well, with the printing press being in the basement, with the radio station being located here. And so it tells a bigger story of what was happening at the local level, because none of the marches happened here in Atlanta. But this is the planning place for them to happen. And so it's not the first time that things are being planned. Things are planned out of Big Bethel, out of Wheat Street Baptist Church. King goes to those ministers as well and sits in on their services to actually learn. We know that Marcus Garvey was active here. The NAACP gets funded and founded in part here with the first Black millionaires, so Alonzo Herndon. Actually, if you look in the pictures of the Niagara movement, you'll see Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois and Alonzo Herndon and his son Norris in those pictures. And so Atlanta has been on the forefront of civil rights for a very long time. And so Dr. King is another one of those punctuated moments that this building is able to actually give us kind of insight and light on civil rights, and use him as a touch point to talk about the history of it and the forward momentum that can continue to happen here on Auburn Avenue.
It's amazing, absolutely remarkable. Thank you for that. Just between the two of you, it's like, okay, I think I get it. I think I get what happened here, and I think I get what's happening now. So I want to turn to you, Shanae. Given this history that Ed and Reggie have just laid out, which I know you're already quite familiar with, we're clear on the neighborhood's historic and cultural significance, right? But now I want to turn to you to talk about your approach towards revitalization and the way you go about it in such a way that it strengthens the neighborhood without erasing the people, without erasing the culture, without erasing this history, to make it what it is today. Can you talk about your approach in revitalization?
HDDC specifically was created to do just that, right? Coretta Scott King, when she created us, understood that there had to be an organization responsible for the non-displacement of the legacy residents, and whatever that meant, someone had to be responsible for it. But that doesn't mean that one organization can do it by itself. We have approached our work more as a convener. There's so many stakeholders, so many partners, such a rich history. And so what we find the best way to approach that work is just like that, collaboratively. This is with stakeholders, residents, municipalities, whatever it's going to take. We think about historic districts, and the thought is, well, we're trying to preserve the buildings. The buildings are obviously important, but the history also is tied to who actually owned the building, right? There is intentionality in that ownership. And so it's important for us to make sure that we're bringing those resources so that the stakeholders who are here are on the front lines of the revitalization, and they're able to benefit from the work that is happening so that we can continue having that legacy, continue having that return that stays right here in our community. And so for us, we want to make sure that we're always talking about what has happened in the past, because I think people forget how hard it has been just to hold on. And we do what Black people do, make a whole lot of something out of very little nothing, right? And so sometimes that has been a hindrance to us because it comes across like, well, you did it before, you can do it again. That's not the case. I can guarantee you the same way that our beloved Masons raised those dollars for the building back in the 30s wouldn't have happened today. Ed had to go get real debt and real equity. Probably get on the corner and sell some AJCs and some Krispy Kreme donuts or whatever he had to do. But we had to get to work just like any other business. And so for us, making sure that, yes, we maintain what has to happen for our buildings to be pristine, but also making sure that the people who are here are part of that economic development, a part of that movement, so we can continue this legacy.
And I'm curious, just a quick follow-up, the level of urgency that has to be staring you in the face every single day, juxtaposed with these systems that you have to work within, and having to just say again and again, just hold on, just hold on. And the city's role and involvement in that condition of urgency versus process and some restrictions that might be in the way. Can you share a little bit about that?
You know, because of the types of organizations that we are, being nonprofits, churches, we rely on philanthropy more than we would probably like, just because what is interesting to foundations at times is cyclical. And so if your support is dependent upon that, sometimes it becomes very difficult to set budgets, to set priorities, because you have no idea if that funding source is not going to change its direction. And so we have to understand that we have been at the mercy. I can tell you COVID was really difficult. We had some great projects that were in process, a lot of philanthropic resources coming to us, and then COVID hits. Well, now there's this shift that happened abruptly, and to the point where a lot of us had offer letters and you know, we had support that had been guaranteed, and then it was just pulled. And so not that COVID wasn't a devastating event that happened for our country, but homelessness was still happening, right? We still had, lack of food in our communities. We still had, disinvestment that was happening. And so how do we parallel and fast track these issues as opposed to only being able to concentrate on one thing at a time? And then when you add to that changes in administration, it really begs for us to be as stable as we can be so that these different changes of the wind don't necessarily knock us all the way off and have us to start all over again. And I think that's part of the struggles that we've been having. But what I think is also important to keep in mind is that the communication, the narrative about who we are as individual stakeholders helps to really elevate those different profiles. We are educated professionals that do this work because we love this work. If we give up, this work will never get done. So it's important for us to maintain that legacy that came not just from Dr. King, but from Alonzo Herndon, from Adrienne Herndon, from, Geneva Hagebrooks, all of those different individuals that actually helped to groom Dr. King and make Auburn Avenue what it is.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that. I want to turn to you now, Jocelyn, about the origin story in the context of TPL's Black history and culture and the significance of Prince Hall Masonic Lodge within that context, within that portfolio.
Yeah, that's a good one. So the origin story of Black history and culture at Trust for Public Land, it's one of those stories that have a couple different origins. So there's a kernel in our first decade of existence where the inaugural TPL president, Huey Johnson, who's one of the founders of TPL, some kind of way had a relationship with Elaine Brown, the only woman to be chairwoman of the Black Panther Party. They got in cahoots doing Gardens in the Ghetto in Oakland back then. That's the first Black history and culture project, predating Black history and culture. Things like that had happened opportunistically throughout the 50-year history of TPL, including TPL's involvement with the Martin Luther King Jr. National Historical Park. Is it also in Preservation District? All right, I'm getting it. And that relationship, I think, began in the 1980s. And there's others like that, Brown v. Board, Little Rock Central, a lot of them Park Service projects, actually. And then circa 2019, our former president and CEO, Diane Regas, was having a conversation with our national board member, Keith Weaver, which led to the creation of Black history and culture. And then, of course, in 2020, the world exploded. So that idea that was in germination got kicked into high gear. Funding was raised. Things were put together. I came on board as the inaugural director of this work in 2022. I was making a note of this conversation of the tension between urgency and process. And so just to in the context, why is this site so important? So there's 4 strands of Black history and culture. There's work in outdoor recreation, which is like a lot of our schoolyards work, which I think is brilliant. There's work in agriculture. There's work in traditional conservation. But then there's this thread of historical cultural work. That work, being in the room where a thing happened, I think it allows us to not just, yes, humanize the people, but I think it gives us this great gift of putting ourselves in the story about Martin Luther King. I can only imagine what it is for him to be walking past Old Ebenezer, walking down the street, because it's not just friends and coworkers and fancy people, like just what that community is. And to imagine what he must have been imagining and to put myself in that story, it makes, not only does it make him less superhuman, but it makes it tangible for me in a way. These spaces, these buildings, these places are so key because we can then touch it and discuss it and have some space of cultural transmission for the next generation. And I'm so happy that we were able to play a supporting role in pulling this together.
And I wanted to add to that too, because I think this is the right place to take a moment and really acknowledge TPL's just involvement, TPL was one of our first partners where they would acquire the land, acquire the different historic houses that were in the Sweet Auburn neighborhood. They sold those houses to HTDC for $1. And then we had a lending partner that provided the financing so that we could either build new or rehab. And then we sold those houses to the National Park Service at market so that we could generate revenue to continue the revitalization and establish the organization. That was done in the late 90s, like mid to late 90s, and look at what that type of selfless partnership was able to create and replicate, over these last few decades.
Thank you for that story because I don't know how well known that is. So thank you. It's one of the things that we've come to understand at Trust for Public Land is there's always so much in the works, and people put their head down and they just get it done, and then once they lift their head, they're moving on to the next thing that they need to achieve. And so you sharing that story is really, really critical, and I'm curious to know how many people inside TPL today even know that. So thank you for giving us that documented oral history that you just shared. I'm going to have to look that up and talk about it. That's fantastic. Ed, I know for you this project is not just about restoring a building. It is this sacred civic space. You shared the history of the building. You shared the kind of the transformation over time, everything that happened inside of it. But for you personally, what has it meant to you to be a part of this all?
Let me tie some things together. So I met a young lady whose name is M. Tamanika Youngblood. And I was working on a project at Auburn and Jesse Hill. And it was probably Butler Street then, and we just clashed. She was all into the maintaining of this area from a historic perspective, and I was the young lawyer developer. I'm going to tear it down and build something new and fancy. And she just cursed me out. And I knew her husband real well. I went crying to George, But it made me realize that I grew up in this area. I don't live in the district now, but I grew up over off of East Avenue and Boulevard and attended Our Lady of Lourdes. So I know this area quite well. And from that conversation I had with M. Tamanika about trying to restore the history of Auburn Avenue, I couldn't let another building collapse and not put forth all my effort to try to save it. And when John Lewis legislated this building into the park, and Senator Lisa Murkowski said, well, we'll go along with the authorization for the building, but no appropriation. So that meant we had to come up with the dollars to restore the building. And I just couldn't say, no, we just can't do it. When these guys were able to raise the money as far back as they did in the late 30s, early 30s, and here I am with all this education, all these connections, all these relationships, and I couldn't take the time to do it myself. I said, there's no way I'm going to give up. The story was so rich of what was in this building, what it stood for, and the fact that it's a different looking building. And when you look at this building, it doesn't look like traditional buildings in Atlanta at that time. It's not red brick. It's yellow brick. So you say, well, why they chose that color? And so a number of things went into my thought and my desire not to let these guys down and not let my membership down. And so it means a lot to me and the partnerships that we developed. And I take my hat off to Shanae because they were struggling trying to get their project done around the same time. She was making progress. So I can't let her get ahead of me. So I had to keep pushing and shoving.
A healthy competition.
Oh, absolutely, because we were doing something different, but because I knew if we both did a development, it would spur other development in the area, and it has. But you got to have complementary projects going to make the area become revitalized, and it worked. So I piggybacked off of a number of people. They didn't know it, but I did.
They know it now.
Well, yes, I forgot we recorded.
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And that is actually a perfect segue because I want to turn back to you, Shanae. in terms of revitalizing in historically Black neighborhoods, I want to hear a little bit about some of the common misconceptions of who's here, who's not here, who's involved, etc.
Some of the misconceptions, one of the biggest misconceptions is that, oh my goodness, you're the Martin Luther King Historic District and you're a nonprofit, so y'all must be getting millions and millions of dollars in grant funding every year. Prior to last year, the largest funding support that HTDC ever received was like $300,000. Last year, we received a grant for about $1.8 million, which was the largest in the organization's history. And so while that we are very thankful for that, Front Porch cost $37.5 million, right? And that's just for phase one. So there's this misconception that we're receiving all of these grant dollars and free money that we're using that we would have access to just to do projects. Not true. We have to go after debt and equity just like any other project, right? Keeping in mind that a nonprofit is just like a for-profit business, we just have a different mission. That's it. So the same needs for operational capital, the same need for skilled labor is just the same for us as it is for any other organization. I also think that there's a misconception that we don't need to generate revenue with our projects. We absolutely do. I mean, how do we turn the lights on if we're not being able to do that? And I say this all the time. There's no nonprofit 2x4. It's not like I can go to Home Depot and say, can you show me the nonprofit section for these materials? It costs exactly the same for us as it does for the high rise in Buckhead that's going to be charging $4,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment, while we're here trying to house families who have 60% of AMI, which is in Atlanta right now is roughly $60,000 or $70,000 for a family of 4. Doesn't go very far, very little profit margin, and yet we keep hearing that there is a need for the product that you're trying to create. And so there's just this imbalance of the value of the work and the resources to achieve those goals. I also think that what we have got to do is just a better communication about, yes, the history is really important, but what is our future? Are we creating neighborhoods for the next John Lewis, the next MLK, the next Henrietta Antonin? Are we doing that? Our young people don't know who they are. And a lot of it is because we don't have the cultural assets that they can just freely walk into and see themselves and understand their history. And so if you don't understand the social return of completing these types of projects, then you really don't understand the state of the environment that we're in right now.
Thank you. Yes. And in thinking about seeing yourself or a reflection of yourself in the places that you enter, the streets upon which you walk, I want to turn to you, Reggie, to understand the national park side. You've been with NPS for a little while. There's got to be something about the service that you provide that is connected to something in your character and your soul.
I'll start with home. So as Ed was talking about Masons and Eastern Stars across the South, my grandparents are Eastern Stars and Masons. And so my grandmother, Evelyn Counts, was a part of the Ladies' Aid Society in her church, which was then a part of the Eastern Stars. And so that part of self-help has always been infused in me. When I was riding an old Bessie, that's her car, going to Piggly Wiggly and seeing how she knitted the community together from the supermarket to the church was impressive to me. It made an impression on me. Or my grandfather taking my uncle to get his license, and he didn't do so well in the driving course, but he did some kind of Mason symbol, and all of a sudden his driving test moved from no pass to pass. And I was like, wow, that's pretty powerful right there, that you can just do some hand symbols and all of a sudden, you can move on in life in the way that you need to. And so in that way, understanding the power of community comes from inside of my own family. And my mother carries that forward as she moves to Los Angeles. And I'm an urban planner, and so that's what people probably don't know. They think I'm a parky, but for about 20 years, I worked in urban planning. I was Shanae in Los Angeles, working for an economic development corporation along Central Avenue, which is very much like Auburn Avenue. It's the first Black community between downtown and Watts. So if you watch Fred Sanford and Sanford and Son, that is 100 on Central Avenue. And so being able to revitalize that community in the same way as Auburn Avenue is being revitalized is a piece of me that I bring to this work as well. The other work is that I was the Chief Operating Officer of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference of Greater Los Angeles. And so that's another part of my work, to this social justice work and really working with the power structure. And so I find this job in the National Park Service that is doing partnerships and philanthropy work and trying to work on the 2016 centennial. And in that process, I'm in the room when Robert Smith is talked about. There was a board member that was there, and our director at the time, John Jarvis, and then Mickey Fern, who was on the board of the Trust for Public Land. Right now, he's our Deputy Director of Legislative Affairs. I think it was a Senate-approved position of President Obama. So we are in the room, and John Jarvis is turning to Mickey Fern and saying, "Hey, we don't have a donor, an African-American donor." And so there is a person who worked on on Obama's campaign that gets up, goes out of the room, and he was kind of this brilliant mind staring up in the ceiling with a cigar all the time. He comes back and he just says, "Robert will do it. Robert will do it." And we're like, well, who is Robert? And so it's Robert Smith. He gives us $40 million in equities for African American sites. And that money came to Auburn Avenue first. And it went to the purchase of the birth home, Dr. King, and the family home of Dr. King in Vine City. He didn't stop. He just gave us $1.4 million for this new project we call Activating Historic Auburn Avenue. And so it is those dollars that are going to allow us to continue working with the Masons on a cooperative agreement. And so it's these gifts that keep on giving, right? So from Coretta Scott King to Robert Smith, to our own my own kind of personal interaction along a journey where I see something as important, dedicate my life to it, get tooled up in it so that I can make a focused impact in a way. And I am honored to be a part of the tribe that's been assembled at this point in time.
I really, really appreciate that. And now we've got this space, we've got this ribbon cutting that's happening tomorrow. We have all of these activities that are happening in and around this building. So the question then becomes, who is going to be using this building? So let's open it up and talk about it.
Well, we're, of course, partnering with the National Park Service so they'll interpret Dr. King's office space on the first floor. The second floor, we're leasing out to organization Center for Civic Initiative. And they're a community organization that is involved in a number of issues, voter registration. They're almost like a SNCC in some respect there, and doing the things that John Lewis was involved in. They're an activist group, so it's kind of reflective of what the Masons have been involved in. And the third floor, where we had our membership meetings, partnering not only with the National Park Service, but the Atlanta History Center to tell the story, because we had a number of documents and papers that were left kind of just scattered throughout the building, and the History Center helped us to compile this information. So we want to tell this history of the Masons, and it's open to the community to have meetings up here in the on the third floor. So we're excited. You know, it's a good thing to anchor this corner and reestablish it as a place for people to come.
And so, and I'll add too that you and I are talking about an easement for the Masons as well. And so to make sure
Yes.
that in perpetuity, there's always a home for the Masons organization to be here. So even when we get to the 7-year period of burning off the New Markets tax credits and we take ownership of the building through TPL, there will be an agreement that the Masons will always have a home here. And we do that often in the National Park Service. So if you take a look at some of the work that we're doing in Gullah Geechee, that's some examples of what it is that we do.
We coined a term that gets used a lot now, but it's the block by block revitalization process. And that's really what we've all been doing. What's important about Auburn Avenue that I just think we need to keep in context, when Auburn was at its height, we never had to leave Auburn Avenue for the things that we needed. We only left to go to work. But everything we needed was right here. Mm-hmm. And so getting back to that and understanding that this community truly has what it needs to feed itself, yes, I think also helps with making sure that we are seeing ourselves and growing as much as we can as a people.
I love that, the entrepreneurial opportunities that can exist. And I love the idea of this being a hub that kind of brings back that village type of approach and how we engage and keeping the dollars within the neighborhood instead of having them be the dollars going several blocks away into other communities. Justin, when you think about this, it's given homecoming, right? It's given homecoming. And when you think about the work that you are leading with Black History and Culture at Trust for Public Land and the potential, not making a commitment in this moment, but potential of where some of the energies can be poured into here, or maybe how we're able to look at what's happening here and build it to scale. Curious to hear some of the things that kind of run through your mind and the vision that that comes up for you.
So self-determination is the goal. You know, land, bread, jobs, education, housing are still relevant needs. Because the reality is our children can't read all the way. You know, too many of our children are hungry. So when I think about this work and what it means to activate a historic space, if children can have knowledge of self, maybe they won't believe the lies that they've been told. I want Black folks to have their hands in the decision-making processes of Black history. The mechanics behind much of Black history is not Black-owned. With self-determination, you know, naming yourselves for yourselves, deciding who you are for yourselves, there's the things we can't even imagine. And that's what excites me. The things that there's a child that's not even born yet that has some dream, some gift that only they can bring. That, you know, earlier in this conversation, I was thinking about the world of a child, Martin Luther King, who those people, how loved he was. So I'm thinking about the child that's not yet born that has the opportunity to be loved thoroughly, three-dimensionally, and growing, and then what dreams they produce. That's the goal.
And I just want to add to that, because that is so powerful. You know, that really is the basis for how I even came up with Front Porch. I wanted to create something, and I say it all the time when we talk about it, we deserve nice things.
Yes.
Right? And so when we went through the process of creating that building, I wanted to make sure that the finishes, that the programming, that everything in that building, you could pick it up and put it in Buckhead, put it in Midtown, put it any place else, and it still shines, it still stands up, right? Because I wanted our people to be able to see themselves at a level that we're not thought of. Even to the point, Front Porch has its own scent. It has its own curated fragrance, right? But we've also got 3 additional gardens that are here in the neighborhood, and we are providing grants to other organizations that have their own gardening. So we have a true ecosystem that's in this space. Too many times when we think about who we are as a people, it's always at this like discount rate, when really, if you look at the trends, the aesthetics, a lot of that came from our culture. So why in the world would we not be worthy of having that in our own communities. And I think that, yep, we definitely set a standard, but these guys here sitting with me have the exact same taste and they have the exact same vision that we continue and maintain that standard in all of the work that we do moving forward.
So you all keep setting me up for the next question, which is like so exciting and also like eerie, but I think it means that we're in a good flow. And so right now, here we are in 2026. There is a lot of talk about America 250. You all are invoking homecoming, you're invoking future, you're invoking those who are yet to be born. And so I just want us to kind of close our conversation out in thinking about the next 250. Where is your family? Where are the children that are yet to be born? And what is it that we need to achieve in order to ensure that vision comes to life?
That's heavy. That's really heavy. I think it's the aspirational and then it's the reality. If certain things aren't in place. I think aspirationally, the tenacity around this table, what it takes to push through all of the trials, obstacles, everything that we have individually and collectively been through. Think about Butler Street, CDC. Alfonso Marshall has been the chair of that board for 25 years or something like that? As a volunteer, they have a project that's happening down the street that is going to be amazing. And Al has done that for free, just because, right? And that's how long it's taken for that project to move forward. And so now that there's been this igniting of the flame, that we will take off, right? 80% of development happens before you hit dirt. I really think that we're at a place now where you're going to see not just more real estate development, but the intentional programming that supports true revitalization in a community like ours. I think in the next 250, we will be in a place where MLK will, of course, still be prominent, but, his great-grandsons, great-nieces, though that generation still is very clear about who he is and the people who made him. And I think that for us, we have to have a succession plan about who's coming next. Everyone, we're all at different ages around this table, and we're all showing a little fatigue because it's really hard work. And so we will need to be able to pass that baton. And if there aren't resources available to help us do that, all of our work is in vain. It just is. And I don't want us to be in that place. Yes. There has to be a collective planning about what is coming next, because each of us, we have a timetable that's here. There's also other pressures that have seen the work that we've done and will happily further disrupt the ecosystem that's been created. And so being that us here are making sure that we keep people at the center, where is that next generation that understands the assignment and can take off and do more than we could ever imagine?
For me, what's coming up is giving people permission to dream. So as you were saying, we deserve nice things. So ensuring that people recognize that, but then also giving folks permission to think for themselves and for the future, because I know very often you can talk about, let's say climate change as an example. And people are saying, you want me to tell you where I want to be in 250 years. I don't even know where I'm going to be tomorrow, right? So I do recognize the difficulty of this kind of question because of that reality versus the aspiration. So thank you for naming that from jump. So curious, others.
So tomorrow in attendance at this ribbon cutting will be my 2 daughters and my 2 granddaughters. My daughters know what I've been doing. My granddaughters who are 7 and 5, I want them to understand what I've done. And I'm trying to leave something for them to remember and know about, because being a 5th generation Atlantan, I didn't know the things that my great-grandfather had done, even though he was a member of this lodge. So I want to be able to leave that kind of image for my kids, grandkids, on what it takes and what you can achieve from hard work. I'm also focused on my next project, which will be more in the health and wellness area. dealing with mental health and providing services for people who are in skilled and assisted living facilities, and being able to be sure they are cared for and have a better way of life, because there's not enough African American operated assisted living or skilled nursing homes and things of that nature, and health and wellness. So those are the things I'm working on with my daughter, because she's a psychologist. It's on the west side of Atlanta, because that's the area I spent most of my young life in. So.
Okay.
So the Park Service is in the perpetuity business. So that means that Auburn Avenue is still here from an African American perspective. It means that we have a full interpretive history of not only Dr. King, not only the male members of the Civil Rights Movement, but the women in the movement and in and along Auburn Avenue, because you can't mention Alonzo Herndon without Adrienne, right? Because she builds the home. And so this idea of going deeper into our stories and continuing the connective tissue that binds us together. I think what people don't understand sometimes about the civil rights movement is that it wasn't only benefiting Black people, but a large number of folks that benefit from it are women. And so being able to really get to those levels of understanding the, as King calls it, this kind of web that we're all tied into. And 250 years from now, the idea of, King's idea of love is normalized. It's not something that we have to profess, preach, drone on about, say, fight about. When I watch things like Star Trek, and you see how things in their future are normalized, right? There is no racial hierarchy or racial tension or differentness. It's just isness. And so somehow they got there. And I envision that happening because of places like this that are able to be preserved and stand as I said earlier, a touchstone of what can be. And so you're not starting from zero every time, but there is a place where you enter and then you elevate above that. And so I'm excited about how people can feel satisfied and no longer yearning to become something, but just being.
So the average everyday citizen of the United States of America does not see themselves in this more global context. And I think that we can learn so much in that way. And I thought about a couple years ago, I was in London, and the sister gave me this Black History guide that they made up in the borough of Southwark. And it featured, although she was like Jamaican British, it featured all of this history from all of the places that Black people are from. And it highlighted it all. And in my mind, I said, wouldn't that be dope if we began to think of ourselves in the context of world history? Because regardless of what your family origin is, if you think about folks from your same religious background or from your same economic origin or from, even from your same geographical point of origin, who move throughout the world, it's a lot easier to see yourself big as opposed to see yourself really small. So that way we can get back to joy. Because I think that is what will exist in 250 years. A lot of love and a lot of joy. A lot, like more joy than we can understand. And I think in moments like this, it feels really, really bleak. But we've been in bleak moments before. And they've been more bleak than this, believe it or not. Like slavery wasn't no walk in the park. But there are, when I go to homecoming or when I go to a church picnic or a Black family reunion, the way I don't think anybody who lived on a floor in a slave cabin could have imagined the sheer amount of joy that comes when you put a good Frankie Beverly record on. You know what I mean? Like I pray that there's that much joy exponentially in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, every single one of you, for your contributions to this conversation, to the world, to your communities, to my personal life. Whether you know it or not, I have a lot to sit and meditate on and a lot of things to kind of take from this conversation to propel me forward. That is the time that we have for today. I know everybody is like busy, busy, busy. It's been an honor. I am humbled. Tomorrow we've got the ribbon cutting. I expect to see all of us there together celebrating this, celebrating its inclusion in the National Park Service, and opening up this opportunity and this future. Maybe tomorrow all of our ancestors will show up and surround us with their love and with their vision, with their strength, so we can continue to endure. So thank you so much.
Thank you.